clutching my pearls. Racist. This is how you get attention. How you doing? Awesome. Good. And hello to your guest. Hey, you know, for me, white supremacy used to give me. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Welcome back. Hottest show in the galaxy is the Karen Hunter Show. We're here on SiriusXM Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. And it is Thrive Thursday. Thrive Thursday brought to you by One United. One United Bank. Celebrate One United Bank by opening an account and let's do the $1 billion challenge at oneunited.com/Karen Hunter. One United, member FDIC. I am on a mission. I believed 5 years ago when I started this radio show that this wealth gap that they said would take 230 years to close could be done in 5 years. I believed that. I just believed it. I was the person that read those Urban League stats that said that black people spend $1 trillion, and I was like, what if we just redirected? In my mind, it was so simple. But again, I'm not an economist. I'm just an optimist, and so I'm committed to having folk on who know what the hell they're talking about, and let's really have an adult conversation about how we can overcome this financial chasm that we seem to have here in America, and one that is keeping an underclass on purpose. Let's have a mindful conversation. Sina Ghaznavi is here, of course. He knows a little bit about money too. Being $200,000 in debt, but he also is a really smart guy. And joining us right now is the author of
credit.
That's good. It's good credit. The author of From Here to Equality. He is a Duke University economist, Dr. William Darity. We call him Sandy. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be on your program. I'm a great admirer of your passion and your preparation.
The passion is always there. Preparation is sometimes, some days, but thank you for that. Listen, when I think about your background, a young man who grew up in a household, ended up at Brown, Ivy League educated, magna cum laude, you studied this economy. Why did you choose that discipline? Because I'm always curious, as a black man in America, why an economist?
So my father actually was a student at Shaw University. My mother was at Barber Scotia. So they came out of HBCUs. But somehow my father ended up working for the World Health Organization in Egypt. And so while I was there, I was pretty young, but I noticed that you could observe the patterns of class stratification as you went along the Corniche, which was the waterfront in Alexandria. So as you move from left to right along the beach, the community that was on the far left end of the beach were the poorest folks in Egyptian society, and their beach was crowded, it was dirty, and then on the upper end of the Corniche, there were paved beaches, and the prices went up the further up the beach you went, and there was much cleaner beaches and much less crowded, and so I came to recognize that there were these patterns that struck me as immediately as sort of inherently unfair. So that was my experience overseas. And then in the United States, my mother's mother lived in Wilson, North Carolina, which is one of the classic southern towns where the white folks lived on one side of the tracks and the black folks lived on the other side of the tracks. And so I got a real sense of the kinds of inequalities that were associated with segregated America at an early age also. And so I think when I went to college, I was really, really committed to trying to learn more about why we have these kinds of inequalities in the world. And I assumed that economics was the field where you could learn how these inequalities came about and how they could be resolved. And I immediately was disappointed with the kinds of answers that conventional economics was providing. And so with the hubris of youth, I said, I'll become an economist so I can change the way they think about these things. So, you know, that probably has not happened, but that's what set me on the path to doing the kinds of research that I've been committed to for many years now.
I often talk about rabbit holes and going down them because I think that that's, you know, kind of the process, and then having discourse with people who are smarter than you so that you can suss out your ideas, you know, about what you just read. Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. Is that still a viable book to start to understand the economy of the world?
I think there are many things that are valuable in the Wealth of Nations, but it suffers from some of the central defects of classical political economy. There's, broadly speaking, an absence of the analysis of power and of the significance or importance of racial and ethnic inequality. Smith is writing in the 1770s, so there's an extended system of slavery that already exists across the Americas. There's very little that he says about that. In fact, I think his primary comments are that we probably should maintain a colonial system but allow the colonists to vote. Something to that effect. And so,
speak to that.
So from a historical perspective, I didn't find the Smith's Wealth of Nations to be very useful in terms of understanding what was actually going on in his own time, and so that's so I wasn't attracted to that particularly. I think I found much more value in Eric Williams's Capitalism and Slavery, who is a historian. He wasn't an economist per se. In W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, and in Oliver Cox's Caste, Class, and Race. So I think
talk about that for a second.
Economist.
And I'm sorry, like I get excited when I talk to people like you. Sina's here. I'm here. We're here with Dr. Sandy Darity from Duke University. He's an economist, the author of From Here to Equality. I get really excited because for most of your time going to school, you are trained in white ideology. You went to Brown, but you were raised in a household with people who understood blackness. And to not have those conversations and to not understand the lens through which these people are writing these things, or they're teaching you these topics based on their supremacy or notions of supremacy, right? Or because they don't even really consider us. The reason why Adam Smith did not have that in there because it wasn't a factor for him when he's talking about wealth. Power is assumed. Of course, we're going to be in power. They founded this whole nation on the notion that wealthy white landowners should be the only ones making decisions. They never factored in a William Darity or a Karen Hunter. That wasn't written into the Constitution. They made a mistake maybe in making it a living, breathing document, but we were not considered, not even in the 3/5 compromise, only from a power standpoint, as you just brought up. So how do we navigate a system that was, from its inception, founded to make sure that you and I never had power or wealth? Dr. Darity.
We struggle. We fight. I mean, I don't know what else we can do. And we struggle also on the field of ideas, which is what I think I've devoted much of my career to trying to do.
Dr. Darity, there's a quick question here. Maybe this is too broad of a question, but given the times we're in with COVID-19, is capitalism still a successful economic model, or have the times that we've seen right now shown the real flaws in not being able to efficiently move resources throughout the country and the world?
So this may be dredging too far into the weeds, but I'm not entirely sure that we are entirely a capitalistic society.
I love it.
I've I've done some work on what I borrowed this concept from some other scholars, but I've talked about what I've described as managerial society. So there clearly are significant and important elements of corporate capitalism that play a dominant role in our world. But I think that many of our societies, particularly the most affluent ones, are gravitating increasingly to a situation in which the social class of individuals who have professional and managerial occupations are really shaping and framing the direction that our nations take. And this is, in a sense, while the capitalists are driven by profits, the social managers are actually driven by ideology. And so the real question becomes, which ideological perspective is dominant? And in the present moment, we actually have a fascist ideology that seems to be the dominant one that's emerging from the folks in the managerial class who are, at the moment, in control of things.
I knew it. It was a middle management problem. They're always the problem.
Dr. Darity is in the building. You can follow him as Sandy Darity, and I like that he's got a cool nickname, Sandy. Why do they call you Sandy? Because of that beach experience in Egypt?
No, not at all. I'm a junior, and my mother didn't want me to be called Little Bill, so she took my middle name, which is Alexander, and somehow she extracted Sandy, and I've lived with it ever since, even though it doesn't match my phenotype.
No, it does, actually. I think there's shades to you, which it makes it even more intriguing. Author of From Here to Equality. As we have this conversation most days, even not on, beyond throughout Thursday on the Karen Hunter Show, about how we can become powerful, how we can empower ourselves, how we can empower our community. My notion is like we need to control our community. Did you find that that's a possibility? And by that I mean we live in a town. We make sure that the mayor, the police chief, and everybody are people that we tell what to do, that they work for us, our prosecutors, we spend money, we support businesses in our own community so the dollar circulates. Anybody who comes into the community that's not from the community, they don't get our dollar. There can't be a liquor store in every corner. We can police who comes in. And by doing that, our kids have jobs, we have thriving businesses, much like the Black Wall Street model. And then we have to factor in, some sort of security so that people can't just come in and burn down the damn thing. Is that possible in this country?
Yes, the security issue is critical because I think that this is the kind of model that you have in mind of essentially a semi-autonomous black community doing for self is exactly what the formerly enslaved had in mind at the time of emancipation. And I think that was a key objective that was associated with the expectation that our people would receive the 40-acre land grants. And had we received those 40-acre land grants, especially the initial allocation that was designated in Sherman's Special Order in Special Order number 15 at the beginning of 1865, we would have had a territory along the coast, the Atlantic coast, stretching from South Carolina to northern Florida. And it would have been an insular community of black folks along that stretch. And in my imagination, that would have been an opportunity for us to do exactly what you're describing. But we never got those 40-acre land grants.
We did. We got them temporarily. They were given out to some people.
400,000 black folks got 40,000 acres out of the 5.3 million acres that were designated under Sherman's Special Order. And that 5.3 million was only a small share of the total 40 million acres that should have gone to the formerly enslaved. But that 5.3 million acres would have been along the Atlantic coast. And so you would have had essentially black land. And it would have been possible then to have developed our own enterprises, to have our control over our municipalities and the like. To the extent that black folks subsequently attempted to do those things in Tulsa, Oklahoma's Wall Street, or in Durham, North Carolina's Wall Street, those communities were systematically destroyed or decimated, either by white massacres, which took place from the end of the Civil War up until the 1940s, where black folks were killed, where their property was either destroyed or appropriated by whites, or, as in the case of my hometown, Durham, North Carolina, they ran federal highways through the center of the black business districts and destroyed those black businesses. So we have tried to do exactly what you're talking about, but we have consistently been consistently diverted from that, and violently diverted from that path.
To the point that I think there's a trigger. As you were talking, I was thinking I'm watching Westworld. I'm watching a bunch of stuff that I've never watched before, and I'm happy because, I'm imagining that Hollywood is going to have a hard time getting back on track once COVID-19 passes in a year or two. So I'm watching things that are like a couple of seasons long. And in one of the opening scenes, Westworld is in the West. It's this virtual world. And this gentleman, they dress him up in his chaps and everything, and the lady said, you just have two choices now. There's a black hat section and then a white hat section. And as he was selecting his hat, and of course he selected the white hat, the cowboy hat, I was thinking how deeply we have been indoctrinated into a notion that white is good, black is bad. This person, Indian giver, we've had that term growing up. When the reality is, white folk gave black folk land and then took it away. But we call that Indian giving. I'm like, how did that become part of the lexicon? That phrase, scalping. That wasn't something that they, so all of these things we've attributed, cowboys and Indians, who wanted to be a cowboy, when we think about that, and most of the cowboys in this country were Africans, black people, the Buffalo Soldiers, and all, but we don't talk about that. We've been brainwashed in a way that I think is indelible, and that has to be part of the work, which is what you're doing with your book and what your scholarship. Isn't it, Dr. Darity is trying to undo some of this?
Similar to what the imperial European historians did to the relationship between Greece and ancient Egypt. They erased the importance and significance of ancient Egypt. And so in a similar way, that pattern carries over here in terms of the way in which we've been constructed as being deficient peoples or dysfunctional peoples. And this despite the fact that, whenever we do what's truly called the right thing, we don't get the same outcomes as white folks get. One of the examples that I think is really powerful is the fact that black heads of household with a college degree have 2/3 of the net worth of white heads of households who never finished high school.
Why? Why is that, Dr. Darity?
It's because of racism, and racism that manifests...
But just saying that to somebody that's listening right now, you're always talking about race. It's always racism. Race. Pick up your own, bootstraps. The opportunities are here for everybody. My people didn't enslave your people. Why are you always talking about race? Why is it always racism? That's just an excuse. What do you say to them? Because you've studied this.
Well, I say that, they need to become honest about the opportunities that they have been granted historically and how they play out in the present moment. So one of the most important examples of that is the fact that while the formerly enslaved were denied the land grants that they were promised, over 1 million whites were given 160-acre land grants, 4 times as large as the land grants that were imagined or anticipated by the formerly enslaved. Were given 160-acre land grants throughout the West under the Homestead Acts. And I think the historian Carrie Lee Merritt now estimates that approximately 45 million living whites are beneficiaries of those land grants. So there was a social policy that was racially different, and it was a social policy that benefited whites and disadvantaged blacks severely. And it's a social policy whose effects still exist today. So it's not just a question of whether or not your family, in quotes, owned slaves. It's a question of whether or not your family benefited from white social advantage through public policy, a set of social advantages that were denied black folks. And so there's a real separation point that we have to pay close attention to that's associated with the way in which national policy has been conducted. And that's why the national government is culpable for the current condition in terms of the huge wealth gap that we observe. And that's why the national government has the debt to pay reparations.
Dr. Darity, I like to think of myself as a conversationalist, and like Karen, I like to learn from having conversations with people. And she brought up a really good point just now about, people always say, it's all about race, it's all about race. Listen, I used to work in a certain area, and people just don't do anything. What is, for a person of color like myself, that finds himself in the middle of a lot of these things, a lot of these conversations, and that white people somehow think that it's okay to say a lot of really crazy things to me sometimes. What advice do you have for folks like me that are trying to navigate these discussions and bring to light some of the issues that you're talking about, some of the deep-seated issues?
Well, I'm not sure if the issue that you're really focusing on is people saying black people don't try hard enough.
Yeah, what are you hearing, Cena? Because you can pass. Most people look at you, they don't see a person of color. They see a person that's hairy. They see somebody, right? So you probably are privy to a lot of conversations because you don't show up in the world as a person that is black or brown, even though I know that you're Persian, right? So what are you hearing? What are they saying about black people?
I mean, people will say, this is a hard work thing I've heard, which is tough to hear. And then
that black people are lazy? Is that what they're saying?
It's the government handout thing. That all they want is a government handout. And then the other aspect there, which is ironic in and of itself, and I think you all know why there. The other aspect that is frustrating is that everything is about race. And then I've actually had to check people, nice people, that have said, I don't see color. I don't see race. And I think I'm a bit of a hair trigger, so it's tough for me because I'll just go off a little bit, but I want to be able to start navigating these discussions because, again, we talked about a war of attrition for something like this. This is not something where I'm just going to convince everybody in one fun dinner. It's something that I'm going to have to, as a person that wants to be an ally, have these conversations consistently throughout my entire life. So I guess that's where I'm coming from.
So I don't know if giving people a body of evidence that contradicts what they believe will actually make a difference. I simply don't. But the claim that black people are dysfunctional or don't try hard is absolutely inconsistent with the evidence. Insofar as there is no evidence that black people try any less hard than any other social group in America. So, one thing that's illustrative of that is the fact that for a given level of family income, young black people get more years of education and more degrees than white folks. Another illustration is the fact that black folks are exceptionally passionate about entrepreneurship. Now, that doesn't have as good a payoff as we might hope, but black men and black women have entrepreneurship rates in terms of business ownership that are no different from whites. And in fact, I think black women's entrepreneurship rate is higher than white women's entrepreneurship rate. So, in terms of effort, desire, motivation, there's absolutely no evidence that blacks lazier. I also find it interesting when people talk about claiming that what they have is a consequence of entirely of their own efforts. I just gave an example that suggests that what many white Americans have is a consequence of a government handout.
The New Deal.
Equity in the form of land. But yes, the New Deal is another illustration, and the GI Bill, where the government provided returning veterans from World War II with financial support to go to college, but also provided them with low interest rate loans for home mortgages, so that they could encourage home ownership. And what's striking about that, once again, is that because of Southern senators insisting on decentralizing the administration of the GI Bill, you had a situation in which white veterans benefited far more heavily than black veterans. And in fact, I think Ira Katz-Nelson has estimated that in the state of Mississippi, there were only 2 returning black veterans who received any benefits from the GI Bill.
That's crazy.
I'm sorry, you said 2?
2. 1, 2.
2. TWO.
866-801-8255. I understand what Sina Ghaznavi is saying, however. I think we have a nation of ignorant people on purpose. Our school books, our school system will never, until they're forced to, and it's actually in the laws that they have to teach, quote-unquote, black history, part of the curriculum. They do not do that. There's a battle right now over textbooks, or what's going to be on the reading list in Alaska. They wanted to take off Richard Wright. They wanted to take off Maya Angelou. And they, when you think about who controls the textbooks, who controls the education, people are speaking out of their ignorance, Dr. Darity, more than they are out of their ideals. But their ideals are inculcated in this ignorance. So if all you see as the welfare queen is a black woman, or all of the movies and the television shows and everything that you see show degenerate black men that don't take care of their children, even though the stats say black men spend more time with their children than white men. Those are facts. Black women hold more degrees than white women. That's a fact. But when all you see is the sassy girlfriend, this and that on television, you're informed by that, and then it feeds what you already believe, right? So I think the question is, how do we get the miseducated? You bring up W.B. Du Bois, but also Carter G. Woodson. The miseducated population, because whiteness is a made-up construct too, which people are bought into. It doesn't exist. It's a lie. How do we start to educate people about the truth?
Yeah, that's the core issue. I listened to you talking with Greg Carr the other day, and you were talking about essentially this issue. I think it was a great conversation. I was particularly struck by the concern that we have in the COVID-19 crisis about the fact that for whatever quality of education we're delivering, there are whole swaths of kids who are denied access to that, because they do not have the kind of infrastructure in their homes that allows them to continue to be schooled when they can't go to the classroom. So, but there is the companion issue of the substance of what they actually do get taught when they're in the classroom. And my co-author on From Here to Equality, Kirsten Mullen, introduced a concept that we brought into the book that she calls dismemory. And in particular, the notion of dismemory is associated with the ways in which the advocates of the Confederacy attempted to and successfully shaped the way in which we teach U.S. history in the United States, particularly U.S. history with respect to the period of Reconstruction and the Civil War itself. That these individuals working through organizations like the United Daughters of the Confederacy actively determined which textbooks would be used and what the content of those textbooks would be in many classrooms across the nation, not just in the South. And so as a consequence, they created this phenomenon that Kirsten calls dismemory, which is a dishonest memory of the nation's past. One of the things that we say should be an important objective and purpose of a reparations program, in addition to monetary compensation, is a corrective of that dismemory. That, for at least 3 generations, there needs to be a substantially revised educational process with respect to the nature of American history. I'm not sure how we execute that in full, but there is no question that there is a strong reason why people have mistaken beliefs, and it's because they've been taught those mistaken beliefs.
Yes, and we're going to talk about some solutions. We're going to talk about how reparations will look as far as you've studied. What would that look like? I like that education is a part of it. 866-801-8255, because I think that probably would help change a whole lot of minds. Most kids spend more time in the classroom than they do in their homes, and that would really help shape a lot of what is going on, especially even with police interactions. 866-801-8255 is the number. We're going to take your calls as well. Dr. Darity, Sandy Darity is sticking around. Of course, Sina Ghaznavi, you can follow him at Sina Now. Let me tell you about Darity. Speaking of education, schools, libraries, bookstores shut down during this pandemic. How do you keep your kids growing and learning? Books from Literati. Literati is the #1 book club for children. It's the best place to start. Literati is the subscription book club that makes it easy to find unique and interesting books for your kids, delivering great stories straight to your doorstep. Literati knows that home deliveries will be critical in meeting your needs and for uplifting educational materials in the coming weeks. Reading books together as a family can also help create a time of adventure and bonding, and has real educational benefits. Kids who read books have better vocabularies, longer attention spans, and each Literati box contains 5 beautiful books based on a theme and contains exclusive original art and a personalized note to your child. For a limited time, go to literati.com/hunter, literati.com/hunter for 25% off your first 2 orders. This is the best offer you'll find anywhere. Go to literati.com/hunter, 25% off your first 2 orders. literati.com/hunter. It's the Karen Hunter Show. Sina, Dr. Darity, and we'll take your calls. We'll be back.
Rebuilding Black Wall Street, brick by brick, city to city. This is the Karen Hunter Show on Sirius XM Urban View, Channel 126. Sunday, NASCAR heads to Charlotte Motor Speedway for one of racing's most storied events. With Coca-Cola 600 miles, 40 drivers in one place to hear NASCAR's longest race. On Sirius XM NASCAR Radio Channel 9.
You're the man!
There's tech for both men and machines. It's always fun to win Coca-Cola 600. Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio Channel 90. Have you been denied credit? Are you paying high interest rates because of a low credit score? Join the thousands of people who've relied on creditrepair.com to help rebuild their credit score.
I went to get my first car. I had to get a used car, high interest, and so I knew that things were done from there.
For over 15 years, we've helped thousands with their search for solutions to credit issues. We communicate with you, your creditors, and the credit bureaus with a unique approach designed to remove items like late payments, collections, charge-offs, liens, bankruptcy, and foreclosures that are unfair or inaccurate.
I've gone up 40 points already.
There are many services offering to tell you your credit score and even monitor it for you. But what good is just knowing your credit score when what you really need is to fix it? Credit Repair members see a significant improvement in their credit scores month after month. Call now to get your no-obligation credit consultation, including your free credit score and free summary credit report. Don't delay. Call 800-617-5790. That's 800-617-5790. 800-617-5790.
Hey, this is Karen Hunter. As an insurance marketplace, Policy Genius talks a lot about how unpredictable the future is. And right now, life is unpredictable and scary. But there are enough brands out there telling you how we're all in this together. Instead, here's Policy Genius's top 2 unpredictably positive things from April. Number 1, thousands of dogs and cats across America have found new homes. People across the world are acting with kindness, compassion, and heroism. That's number 2. Policy Genius is an insurance marketplace, and here's how they can help. Policy Genius compares quotes from the top life insurance companies in one place. It takes just a few minutes to compare quotes from the top insurers to find your best price. Once you apply, Policy Genius will handle all the paperwork and red tape for free. So if you're one of the many people looking to buy life insurance right now, but you're not sure where to start, head over to PolicyGenius.com. Policy Genius will help you find the best rate and handle the process completely. You can stop worrying about life insurance and get back to baking your own bread, adopting a furry friend, or just being kind and considerate.
For all of our sakes, we need to avoid crowds as much as possible. But what if you need to go to the post office or mail letters and packages? Whether you're a small business or have a new work-from-home setup, Stamps.com can help. Print postage on demand and never pay full price with access to discounted rates you can't even get at the post office. Like 5 cents off every stamp and up to 62% off USPS and UPS shipping rates. Print official stamps and labels right from your home or office computer for any letter, any package, anywhere you want to send. Once your mail's ready, just leave it for your mail carrier. Schedule a free package pickup or drop it off. No human contact required. Right now, listeners get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the home page, and type in XM. Stamps.com, enter XM. Stay safe, everybody. Real estate expert Jennifer Hammond on Urban View.
You know, even in the Washington, D.C. area, a lot of the donation places are closed. So you got all these great things to donate, but there's no place for them to go. So online yard sales, I think, are just such a great way, and the post offices are open even with the stay-at-home orders in different areas. So you can mail things to people. You can do things.
Get informed with real estate expert Jennifer Hammond, Saturday morning, Sirius XM's Urban View.
Money doesn't make you demand. Be yourself, man. Guess it's money and grand. Okay, I'ma get this money really all day, but not to the point where I'm going the wrong way. I'ma put my money down on rides and all that. Hook up the house so me and my spouse can fall back. Invest in my knowledge way beyond college. Write books, fly hooks in my cottage. Jeez, bling bling, yo, please.
Yeah, KRS-One, Boogie Down Productions. Welcome back. He's spitting that knowledge way before anybody else. I'ma just say it. It's the Karen Hunter Show. We're here. It's Thrive Thursday on the Karen Hunter Show. And let me tell you about LegalZoom. Health and safety, of course, are on top of everyone's mind right now. No matter what happens, you want to make sure that your loved ones are protected. That's why LegalZoom continues to provide a reliable way for everyone to set up the right estate plan without leaving your home. It starts with finding the answers to your questions. Do you need a last will and testament or a living trust? What about an advanced healthcare directive? What's a power of attorney? I know Cena knows because he is an attorney, but listen, you don't have to figure everything out on your own. You can just go to LegalZoom online. They have resources. They make it easy to get started, and if you need to speak to an attorney, they have an independent attorney network that's there to guide and advise you, and because it's not a law firm, you don't have to worry about those expensive billable hours adding up. Take an important step for your family today. Go to LegalZoom.com to get started on a last will, a living trust, and more. Use code HUNTER at checkout. See what happens. That's LegalZoom.com, code HUNTER, LegalZoom, where life meets legal. All right, we have an economist who also got a degree in political science, so he understands the complexity of this thing. Dr. Darity, Dr. William Sandy Darity is here. Sina Ghaznavi is here. As I'm going through your book, and I haven't delved into it yet, and I want to start the conversation. I invite people on because this is just the beginning. We're going to keep having a conversation with you, Dr. Darity. The book is called From Here to Equality, and it's a whole exploration around this thing called reparations, which makes some people's head pop off just to talk about it. What was the challenge in broaching this topic, and how do you convince people that this is a must?
I'm not sure. I mean, that's one of the objectives of the book. We're hoping people will read it and come away saying, well, this compels me to think about this issue in a completely different way from the way in which I originally thought about it.
Wait. We just talked about how miseducated people are. This book is more than 400 pages long. Folks don't even want to read a damn whole article on something that's factual. You want them to read 424 pages of scholarly work because it's a dense book.
I'm perfectly happy if they buy the audiobook and listen to it.
You do a tweet thread? Could you just tweet every line?
The audiobook version was Amazon's top seller in African American studies, top new seller in African American studies. So the audiobook, J.D. Jackson does the narration.
I was just gonna say your reader is amazing.
It sounds really good. So,
yes, it does.
You know, if people don't want to read, they can entertain themselves by listening. You know, I hope that our introduction is sufficiently compelling. The introduction's not very long, but our introduction is sufficiently compelling that people will probe deeper into the book. We don't necessarily expect every reader to read every chapter, but the final chapter is the one in which we do something that I don't think anyone has ever done, which is actually sketch a way in which a reparations program might actually be executed. And there's some other, I hope there's some other gems in the book, but that final chapter is the one that's definitely unique. I think one of the things that I'd like to emphasize about the book is the book is not exclusively about reparations for slavery. It's about reparations for American descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. But the case for reparations is based not solely upon the horrors of slavery, but also the atrocities that are associated with nearly a century of legal segregation in the United States, coupled with white terror campaigns. And also atrocities that have occurred subsequent to the passage of the civil rights legislation. And here I would include mass incarceration, police executions of unarmed blacks, the ongoing discrimination in housing, credit markets, as well as employment, and then perhaps most important from my standpoint as an economist, the enormous racial wealth gap, where black Americans constitute about 13% of the nation's population, but only possess about 2.6% of the nation's wealth. And that translates into a differential per household on average of $800,000 in net worth between white and black households.
Wow. 866-801-8255. Give us some points on this last, how this will be executed, because I think it's an easier conversation to have during this COVID-19 where it seems like the government can literally print money at any point in time, anytime they feel like it, and dole it out. Apparently, the veil is lifted now. We know that they can print money at will. So the notion that we don't have the money for it, that has gone out the window. So give us some practical things that you lay out in your book in terms of how we execute reparations.
I would like to, I'd like to piggyback on what you just said. I think that the COVID-19 crisis, and I think to a large extent the recession of 2008, also demonstrated that the question of how will you pay for it is no longer a serious question. Now, I will say this. Although the budget deficit is not a constraint on federal spending, what is a constraint is whether or not you generate a high inflation risk. And so any additional spending that's conducted by the federal government that is not directly supported by taxation, it's important that we make sure that the programs are designed in such a way that we don't have an inflation risk. So that's my only proviso. And we actually talk about that in the book, where we talk about the magnitude of the funds that would be required for a reparations program. We also say that the way in which they are distributed or allocated must be conscious of the potential for an inflation risk. But
what's the price tag?
One of the things, that's one of the things we do in the book is we try to examine a variety of ways in which you could actually measure the size of the reparations bill. And we start by talking about the cost that were associated with enslavement. And we settle on an estimate there that's attributable to Thomas Kramer, where he argues that what we have to do is calculate the value of the total amount of time in each day during the course of a week, because all of that time was stolen from the people who were enslaved. And I think he comes up with an estimate in present value of approximately $14 trillion. Another route that we've used is to try to think about what the present value of 40 acres would be if 40 million acres of land had been allocated to the formerly enslaved. And there we come up with an estimate that's closer to $6 trillion. But there's an important issue surrounding the question of whether or not today's living descendants of the persons who were enslaved should receive a payment for the cost of enslavement to their ancestors. And what we conclude is actually what we should be concerned about is the costs that are being borne by the currently living that are a consequence of the entire trajectory of racial injustice in the United States.
I love that.
So,
I love it.
Yeah, so we argue that that's captured by the racial wealth gap. And so one of the priorities of a reparations program must be allocating a sufficient sum of dollars to eliminate the racial wealth gap.
I love it. I love it. We're going to have a deeper conversation with you in the future, Dr. Darity, and we'll bring on your co-author as well to have this reparations conversation. But I want to take some callers.
She's much more charming than I am.
Oh, stop it. Stop it, Dr. Darity. I can't even imagine. That's not even possible. Let's head over to Kay. Kay in Seattle. Thanks for calling. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
Hi, thank you. I follow you, Dr. Darity, on Twitter. Always enjoy checking in with you. You talked about the different factors that have contributed and continue to contribute to the racial wealth gap. One of the things that I recently read about was the Freedmen's Bureau after Reconstruction and how the Freedmen's Bureau gave assistance to whites, in some cases at greater levels than blacks. And I always thought the Freedmen's Bureau was to assist, blacks and black people and formerly enslaved people here in this country. But learning that fact, caused me to think more about that as a factor as well. If you could offer some insight and reference into that. Do you think that, and do you think it's possible to close the racial wealth gap between blacks and Latinos and whites? And if you could also address the lack of capital, startup capital for black entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions there.
I know. I was like, just pick one, because you'll be back.
Let me start with the Freedmen's Bureau. Because the Freedmen's Bureau's charge was to assist individuals who were called refugees, that permitted the Freedmen's Bureau to include some whites as beneficiaries of their services.
They always are slipping that in, Dr. Darity. They did the same thing with affirmative action.
Yes.
Get slick with the language and then invite all these other folk in.
Yeah. But I think that there are two other ways in which the Freedmen's Bureau failed the formerly enslaved. The first is the Freedmen's Bureau did not execute, although General Oliver O. Howard, who was at one point the head of the Freedmen's Bureau, was very, very committed to doing this. The Freedmen's Bureau did not manage to provide the allocation of the land grants that it was supposed to deliver. Now, that's not necessarily the fault of the Freedmen's Bureau insofar as Andrew Johnson, the president who succeeded Abraham Lincoln, eliminated the land allocation program altogether. and had the lands turned back over to the former slaveholders. But that's the first way in which the Freedmen's Bureau didn't fulfill the task that it should have on behalf of the formerly enslaved. But the second is associated with something that we look at in the final appendix to our book, which is the collapse of the Freedmen's Bureau because of financial corruption and mismanagement on the part of its white board of directors. Which meant ultimately that the Freedmen's Bureau went out of existence, its bank went out of existence, and that cost the formerly enslaved folks. I think that this is an extraordinary figure because I can't even fathom how they managed to put this much into savings. But I think it cost them about $4 million in savings. Disappeared.
Oh my God. 866-801-8255. As I mentioned, we're going to have Dr. Darity back on, economist, Duke University professor and author of From Here to Equality. The the audiobook is amazing. You're correct about the narrator. Very well done. So that is an easier time to spend than the 400 plus pages to read for those of you who aren't avid readers. Let's head over to Suri. Suri in Tennessee, welcome. You're on with Dr. Darity. Suri? Okay. Nobody's there. Okay, then let's go to Eddie in Chicago.
Hey, Karen, how you doing?
Awesome.
Good, and hello to your guests. Hey, for me, white supremacy used to get me twisted up, but then it became very clear to me. It's simple. They're going to do everything they can do to stay in power. And anything, because allowing anybody to remotely get close to jeopardizing their power goes against the whole point of being in power. It's a contest, and what I think for me, what frustrates me with us is, I think we spend too much time being frustrated over their efforts to stay in power, which is really just a contest. But we watch sports all the time, so we understand the contest of winning and losing. But when it comes to the biggest game in our lives, which is the game of life, we get all twisted and bent out of shape.
Let me pause you. Every time somebody brings up the New England Patriots cheating asses, people get twisted in a bunch because cheating should not be part of the contest. The baseball team that just got I think LeBron James is about to do a whole documentary. Yeah, we get twisted over cheating because somebody stumbles on the scale and it's not a fair deal. I hear what you're saying. I say it all the time. Our focus is to build power and wealth, not through their lens. But we gotta know all of the ways in which the cheating happens so that we can prevent it from happening in the future. Do you agree with that, Dr. Darity?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also think that the problem is if we in fact set as a target elimination of the racial wealth gap, unfortunately, we cannot do it with our existing resources as an autonomous effort on the part of the black community. Therefore, we need congressionally approved reparations, and we will have to persuade an adequate number of white Americans that that's the right thing to do. I'll note that at the beginning of 2000, the year 2000, a survey was conducted in which Michael Dawson and Ravana Popov found that 4% of white Americans endorsed reparations for black Americans. 4%. Okay. But today, that figure is closer to 20%. And almost a majority of millennials actually endorse reparations for black Americans. And so it's not an impossible mission. It's a hard mission, but it's not an impossible mission. And for us to alter the fundamental resource base that we have in the black community, we are going to have reparations payments.
Well, we're going to have this conversation over the next several months with you, Dr. Darity, and I appreciate the scholarship. I appreciate the study. I appreciate your mind. It's a beautiful mind that you have, sir. And I'm looking forward to having you back on to continue this conversation. you have an open seat at our table, Dr. Sandy Gary.
Thank you.
Very generous. Thank you.
Nah, this is for our self-preservation. Listen, from here to equality, get the audio book if you are not good at reading, or even if you are, you should have it anyway. Y'all driving around, cleaning your house or whatever, pop that thing in, hit play, and get the knowledge infused. Go to sleep with it so that you can wake up with it on your mind. Appreciate him. 866-801-8255. Why am I giving out the number? Because Tiffany Aliche will be joining us, the Budgetnista, to talk practically as well about our money. We're on mission. It's Live Thursday. Cena Gaznaby is here, and he doesn't need Super Beast because he has got a ball of energy. Yes, he does. I